The wind howled across the Wyoming prairie, a lonesome sound that seemed to seep into the very bones of the old ranch house. Inside, it rattled the window panes and sent a chill skittering across the floorboards that no amount of fire in the pot-bellied stove could entirely banish. And it was nothing compared to the frost in Elena Vance's voice. "I don't need a keeper," she stated, her tone flat and final as she set a chipped enamel coffee cup down on the worn oak table with a decisive click. "And I certainly don't need a husband." The man seated across from her, a lawyer from Cheyenne named Mr. Henderson, sighed and adjusted his spectacles. He had the weary look of a man who had been trying to reason with a hurricane. "Elena, it's not about needing a keeper. It's about the will. Your father's will is quite explicit. The Double V Ranch must pass to a man a husband. It's an archaic stipulation. I agree. But it's ironclad. You have 1 year from the date of his passing to marry, or the land and all its holdings revert to the state." "Then let the state have it," Ilya said, her chin lifting in defiance. Her hair, a fiery cascade of auburn, was escaping its practical bun, framing a face that was all sharp angles and fierce intelligence. "I'd rather see it burn than be handed over to some fortune-hunting fool who thinks he can come in here and tell me how to run my own life." She was known throughout the county as Firecracker Vance, and the name was earned. At 26, she was considered unmanageable, too opinionated, too educated, and far too independent. She could ride, rope, and shoot better than most men in the territory. She could quote poetry in 3 languages and balance a ledger book with the precision of a Swiss clockmaker. Men found her intimidating. They found her unsettling. They whispered that she was a man-hater, that she was too much for any man to handle. The truth was far simpler. She had simply never met a man who didn't try to diminish her. "I'm not suggesting you find a fool," Henderson said, his voice gentle. "I'm suggesting you find a partner. A man of means, perhaps, who would respect the arrangement. It doesn't have to be a love match. It could be a business transaction. You could keep the ranch, and he could keep the title. In a year's time, you could have the will amended. It's merely a formality." "A formality," Elena echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her. "A formality that involves giving half of everything I own to a stranger. A formality that reduces me to a piece of property being transferred from one man to another. No, thank you, Mr. Henderson. I'll find another way." She had been fighting all her life. She'd fought her father's refusal to teach her the business of the ranch, learning by watching through keyholes and listening from behind doors. She'd fought the local cattle barons who tried to cheat her on grazing rights. She was fighting the very land itself, a constant battle against drought, blizzards, and the shifting moods of the prairie. The last thing she needed was to fight a husband, too. The day after Henderson's visit, a blizzard rolled in off the mountains, a white fury that turned the world into a featureless, howling void. Elena spent the day and the following night in the barn, helping a prize mare deliver a difficult foal. By the time the storm began to abate and the first pale light of dawn touched the frosted windows, she was exhausted, her hands raw and her clothes stiff with ice and sweat. The foal, a leady black colt, was alive and nursing, and for that small victory, she allowed herself a moment of weary triumph. She was trudging back to the main house, fighting through the knee-deep drifts when she saw him, a dark shape in the white landscape, leading a horse that was nearly as exhausted as he was. He was a tall man, bundled in a heavy coat and a hat that was crusted with ice. He looked like a traveler who'd lost his way in the storm and had managed to stumble upon the only shelter for 50 miles. He saw her at the same moment. He pulled the scarf down from his face, revealing a strong jaw, a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once, and eyes the color of a winter sky, a startling, vivid blue. They were weary, but there was a calmness in them, a steadiness that she found strangely disarming. "Morning," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Looks like I got turned around. Mind if I hole up here until this lets up?" Elena assessed him with a practiced eye. She'd seen drifters before, men looking for a free meal and a warm place to sleep before moving on. Some were harmless, some were not. But this one looked too bone-tired to be a threat. She also saw that his gloves were torn, his hands likely frozen. He'd survived a night in a blizzard that would have killed a lesser man. "Get your horse in the barn," she said, her voice brusque. "There's a stall at the end. I'll get you some coffee." He nodded, a simple gesture of thanks, and led his horse away. It was only then that Elena noticed the way he moved. It wasn't the clumsy, uncertain gait of a man who'd spent his life in a city. It was the fluid economy of motion of a man who was comfortable in his own skin and in the saddle. A man who knew the land. Inside, she stoked the fire and put a pot of coffee on. When he knocked on the back door and stepped into the mudroom, she heard him stamp the snow from his boots. He was bigger than she'd first thought, tall and broad-shouldered, with a lean build that spoke of hard physical work. He took off his hat and coat, revealing a head of sandy brown hair, the color of wheat in the autumn sun. He ran a hand through it, shaking out the last of the ice. "I'm Lucas," he said. "Lucas McCall." "Elena Vance," she replied, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. He took it, and she noticed the rough, callous skin of his hands. These were not the hands of a banker or a lawyer. These were the hands of a working man. He took a sip of the hot coffee and let out a long, slow breath, the tension visibly draining from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You saved my life." She waved a dismissive hand. "It's a roof, and some coffee. Don't make a hero of me." He didn't argue. He just leaned against the counter, warming his hands on the cup, and looked around the kitchen. He took in the well-ordered shelves, the pots and pans hanging from the wall, the pile of kindling by the stove. His gaze wasn't idle, it was observant, almost assessing. "Nice place," he said quietly. "Well kept. You do all this yourself?" "I do everything myself," she answered, a hint of a challenge in her voice. "I don't need a man to tell me how to keep my own house." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Didn't say you did. Just making an observation." He took another sip of his coffee. "Heard about you in town. Over in Laramie, and in Cheyenne." Her guard went up instantly. "Oh, and what is it they say?" He didn't flinch. He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze steady and unwavering. "They said there was a woman running the W who could outride, outshoot, and outthink any man in the territory. They said she was a force of nature, and they said she was a handful." The words hung in the air between them. She waited for the sneer, the condescension she'd come to expect. She waited for him to say she was too much. But instead, he just shrugged. "The way I see it, a force of nature isn't a bad thing. The prairie's a force of nature. The river's a force of nature. You don't try to tame them or fight them. You learn to work with them. You respect them." He finished his coffee and set the cup in the sink, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "My father used to say that the only trouble with men is they are afraid of what they can't control, and they'd rather call it a nuisance than admit they are scared of it. Sounds to me like you're just a lot of nature, and that's not a problem. It's a fact." Elena stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. In all her 26 years, no man had ever spoken to her like that. They either tried to dismiss her, patronize her, or challenge her. Lucas McCall simply acknowledged her. He didn't try to shrink her down or shape her into something more palatable. He just saw her, and he didn't blink. The storm raged on for the rest of that day and the next. Lucas McCall, it turned out, was not one to sit idle. The first thing he did was repair the loose shutter on the barn that had been banging all night. Then, without being asked, he helped her chop the wood she'd been meaning to get to. He was quiet, competent, and he didn't seek her approval for every little thing he did. He just saw a need and filled it, the same way she did. Elena found herself watching him, trying to reconcile the man in her kitchen with the man the world had told her to expect. He was calm, not loud and posturing like most men. He had a dry wit that she found herself responding to, and a deep, resonant laugh that seemed to fill the house when he used it, which was rare. On the second night, as she was preparing dinner, he offered to help. She was about to refuse, an old reflex, when he simply said, "I can peel those potatoes faster than you can. You focus on the stew." It was such a simple, practical suggestion devoid of any power play. He wasn't trying to take over her kitchen. He was just offering to make a tedious task easier. And so, for the first time in her life, Elena Vance allowed a man to help her. They worked in comfortable silence, the only sound the crackling fire and the howling wind outside. After dinner he sat at the table nursing a cup of coffee. She was trying to fix the recalcitrant hinge on a kitchen cabinet, her frustration mounting. "Here," he said, getting up, "let me look at it." "I can manage," she said, her old defensiveness creeping back. "I know you can," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "But sometimes it's nice to have someone else do it for you. Sit down and let me show you." There was no condescension in his voice, no implication that she was helpless. It was a simple, genuine offer. He held out his hand, and she stared at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, she handed him the screwdriver. He knelt, his long fingers working deftly at the hinge. "The screw stripped," he said without looking up. "Easy fix. I'll just put a shim in there to give it something to bite into." She watched him, her arms crossed. He was focused, his brow slightly furrowed. He was doing something he knew how to do, and he was doing it well. There was a quiet confidence in him that was utterly unassuming. He finished the job in a few minutes, tested a hinge, and stood up, brushing the dust off his knees. "Good as new." "Thank you," she said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. He looked at her, and for a moment, the blue of his eyes seemed to pierce right through her. "You don't have to thank me, Elena. It was a simple thing. We take care of each other. That's what people do." She felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly. It was something more profound. It was the feeling of being seen, not as a problem to be solved or a challenge to be conquered, but as an equal, a partner. When the storm finally broke, the morning sun was dazzling, turning the world into a vast, glittering landscape of white. Lucas McCall saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that had weathered the storm remarkably well. "Thank you for your hospitality, Elena," he said, pulling on his gloves. "I won't forget it." "Where will you go?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "South, I reckon. They say there's work down in Colorado." He swung into the saddle with an easy grace. He looked down at her, the morning sun casting long shadows across the snow. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind, which had been such a constant, screaming presence, was now just a whisper. She felt a sudden, inexplicable surge of panic. He was leaving. He was just a drifter, a stranger, and he was leaving. And she would be alone again, with her dead father as well and her too much self and the cold, empty rooms of the double V. "Wait," she said, the word sharp and sudden in the crisp air. He reined in his horse, and turned to look at her. The question was in his eyes. Elena took a deep breath. She was a Vance. She didn't beg, and she didn't plead. She stated facts. "Mr. McCall, I have a proposition for you." He didn't react with surprise or delight. He just waited, his gaze steady and patient. I need a husband, she said bluntly. Not a real one. A business arrangement. For 1 year. You get a roof over your head, good food, and a decent wage. What I get is my father's land. It's an archaic law, but it's binding. She braced herself for his laughter, his rejection. Instead, he was quiet for a long time, studying her face as if he were trying to read a book written in a language he didn't quite know. You'd marry a stranger to keep your land? He asked, his voice unreadable. I'd do a lot of things to keep my land, she said, her chin lifting. It's the only thing in this world that's ever been mine. Another long silence. The horse shifted its weight, its breath forming clouds of steam in the cold air. Then Lucas McCall did something utterly unexpected. He dismounted. He walked toward her, his boots crunching in the snow. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes and the faint dusting of freckles across his nose. All right, he said simply. I'll do it. She blinked. Ye will. I will. On one condition. Her heart, which had soared for a moment, plummeted. What condition? He reached out, his gloved hand coming up to brush a stray strand of fiery hair from her cheek. The touch was so unexpected, so gentle that it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. That you sit down, he said, his voice low and steady, and let me show you what it means to be with a man who isn't afraid of you. The next few weeks were a massed class in confusion for Elena. They were married by a justice of the peace in town, a simple, unceremonious affair. Lucas McCall was now her husband, in name at least. He moved into the ranch house, taking the small room at the end of the hall. He was a quiet and orderly presence, always cleaning up after himself, always offering to help but never intruding. He worked the ranch alongside her, and it was in those long days on the range that she began to truly understand him. He was a master of his craft. He could read the weather like a sailor reads the sea. He had an uncanny ability to understand the cattle, to know when they were spooked or sick. He was patient with the horses, speaking to them in a low, soothing voice that seemed to calm even the most fractious animal. He didn't try to control them. He earned their trust, and he taught her without ever making her feel like a student. He'd point out something he'd notice, a pattern in the grass, the way a hawk was circling, and then let her draw her own conclusions. He never told her she was wrong. He simply showed her another way to look at a problem. It was infuriating and exhilarating in equal measure. One evening after a particularly hard day, she came in from the barn, her back aching and her hands chapped. She found him in the kitchen. A pot of hot water on the stove. He'd set out a basin and a clean towel. Sit down, he said, pulling out a chair. He didn't give her a chance to argue. He took her hands, his own calloused and warm, and gently lowered them into the basin of hot water. She gasped at the heat, but the relief was immediate. The warmth seeped into her aching joints, and she felt the tension begin to drain from her shoulders. You've got to take care of your hands, he murmured, his thumbs gently massaging the sore muscles of her palms. You can't do your work if you can't hold the reins. It was the most intimate thing anyone had ever done for her. She sat there speechless as he ministered to her. He didn't say another word. He just worked, his strong fingers loosening the knots of exhaustion in her hands. After a while he dried them with a towel, his touch gentle, almost reverent. He looked at her, his blue eyes searching hers. You don't have to fight all the time, Elena. Not here. Not with me. I don't know how not to, she whispered, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. It's all I've ever known. I know, he said softly. That's why I'm here. To help you learn. The weeks turned into months. Spring came to the prairie, painting the land in shades of green and wildflowers. The cattle were calving, a busy and chaotic time. Lucas and Elena worked side by side, their movements synchronized, their communication often reduced to a single word or a shared glance. The townspeople, who had been so sure the marriage was a sham, began to whisper again. They saw the way Lucas looked at her. They saw the way she didn't flinch when he took her hand. They saw the way they moved around each other. A perfect, harmonious dance. Their disbelief turned to grudging acceptance, then to something like wonder. The too-much woman had finally met her match. But Elena was still fighting. She was fighting the feelings that were blossoming in her heart, feelings she had sworn she would never allow herself to have. He was kind and patient and the most maddeningly attractive man she'd ever met. He made her laugh, he made her think, and he made her feel things she had no name for. She was falling in love with Lucas Bacall, and it terrified her, because what if it was just an act? What if he was just biding his time until the year was up? What if he, like all the others, would leave? The truth came out on a sweltering day in July. Lucas had spent the morning mending a stretch of fence near the creek. He came back to the house drenched in sweat, his shirt sticking to his back. He stripped it off in the mudroom, and Elena, coming in from the garden with a basket of vegetables, stopped dead in her tracks. On his back, just below his left shoulder blade, was a tattoo. It wasn't a crude, drunken design like she'd seen on other cowhands. It was a beautifully rendered image at a heart with a scroll that read Amor Vincit Omnia, love conquers all, and inside the heart was the name Rose. Something cold slithered into her stomach. Rose, she said, her voice flat. Who is Rose? He turned, his expression closing off for a brief second before he saw the look on her face. He saw the fear, the hurt, the return of the old, jagged wall she was putting up. A ghost, he said softly. A memory. A memory, she repeated, the words like acid on her tongue. A memory you carry on your skin. A wife, a sweetheart. A wife. He admitted. She died 7 years ago. The vegetable basket slipped from her fingers, spilling tomatoes and cucumbers across the floor. She didn't see them. All she could see was that name etched into his skin, a permanent reminder of another woman. A woman he had loved enough to mark his body for. Why didn't you tell me? She demanded, her voice shaking with a fury she couldn't control. Why did you let me? Why did you make me think? She couldn't finish the sentence. The betrayal she felt was a physical ache in her chest. He had let her fall in love with him. He had been kind and gentle and had said all the right things. And all along, his heart had belonged to someone else. He had just been playing a role, using her for shelter and a wage, just like she'd always feared. Now listen to me, he said, taking a step toward her. Don't touch me, she screamed, backing away. Don't you dare touch me! This was a business deal, a transaction. That was the agreement. It wasn't real. None of it was real. The hell it wasn't, he said, his voice rising for the first time since she'd met him. It was a low growl, full of frustration and an aching emotion she refused to recognize. I didn't tell you because I don't talk about it, he said, his jaw tight. Because it's not something I share with strangers. And you weren't a stranger to me. Not for a long time. But you were still so damn determined to keep me at arm's length. I was afraid that if I told you, you'd use it as a weapon. You'd see it as proof that I couldn't love you. You don't love me, she shouted, her face streaked with tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. You couldn't. You loved her. You still love her. I will always love Rose, he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. She was my wife. The mother of my unborn child. They both died in a fire. I couldn't save them. They took a part of me that I will never get back. He walked toward her, his eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. But that part is gone. It's dead and buried. Was here. What I feel for you, that is a different love. It's a new love, a living love, and it's every bit as real and powerful as what I felt for her. He stopped in front of her, towering over her. She was trembling, her heart pounding against her ribs. "You are so much, Elena Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're more than I ever dreamed I'd find. You're a force of nature, and I love you for it. I don't want a woman who needs to be saved. I want a woman who can stand beside me in the middle of the storm and not blink. I want you." "You want me?" she choked out, the words barely a whisper. "Yes," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "All of you. Your fire. Your strength. Your stubbornness. I want to be the one you turn to when you're tired. I want to be the one who gets to see the softness behind all that armor. I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that you're not too much. You're exactly enough for me." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Sit down," he whispered, his breath warm against her lips, "and let me show you." This time, the command wasn't about a broken hinge or a basin of water. It was an invitation, an offering. It was the first step into a future she had been too afraid to believe in. With a sob that was equal parts relief and release, she collapsed against him. He caught her, his strong arms wrapping around her, holding her close as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He led her to the chair and knelt in front of her, his hands never leaving hers. "The first time I saw you," he said, his voice a low, steady murmur, "you were coming out of that barn, covered in snow and looking like you could fight off the whole world by yourself. I knew right then I had to get to know you." He took one of her hands and pressed it to his chest, over his heart. "My wife had auburn hair, just like yours, and a fierce temper. She used to say I was the only man she ever met who wasn't afraid of her." He looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I wasn't afraid of her, and I'm not afraid of you. I love you, Elena. I love you for your strength and for your vulnerability. I love you for the way you fight for what's yours, and I want to be yours, if you'll have me." "What if I don't know how?" she whispered, her voice raw with fear. "What if I screw it all up? What if I'm too much even for you?" He smiled then, a slow, radiant smile that warmed her more than the summer sun. He stood up, pulling her to her feet, his arms still wrapped around her. "Then I'll be right here to pick up the pieces," he said, "and we'll try again. That's what love is, Elena. It's not a perfect thing. It's a stubborn thing. It's a thing that doesn't give up, and I'm the most stubborn man you'll ever meet. You might be a force of nature, but I'm a mountain, and mountains don't move." He lowered his head, his eyes searching hers for permission. She gave it, a tiny nod, her lips parting in anticipation. His kiss was gentle at first, a soft exploration, but as her arms came up around his neck, pulling him closer, it deepened. It was a kiss of promise, of surrender, and of victory. It was the end of a war that had been raging inside her for as long as she could remember. It was the beginning of a peace she had never dared to hope for. When they finally broke apart, breathless, she looked up at him. The fear was still there, a faint echo in her heart, but it was eclipsed by something far more powerful: hope. "I love you, Lucas Wakal," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I love you, and I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try. You're right, I'm a force of nature, but I think maybe I'd like to be a force of nature that loves you." He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "That's all I ask," he said. "Now, come on. I need to get my shirt on. But tonight, I'm going to show you what it's like to be loved." And he did. Not with grand gestures or flowery words. He showed her with 1,000 small kindnesses. He brought her coffee in bed. Without being asked, he left wildflowers on her pillow. He fixed the latch on the gate she'd been meaning to fix for a year. He listened to her talk about her father's will, her fears, her dreams. He held her through the night when the nightmares came, whispering reassurances until she fell back to sleep. He respected her strength, never trying to diminish it. And he cherished her softness, never taking it for granted. He was her partner in every sense of the word. He helped her manage the ranch, his financial acumen proving to be as sharp as her own. They began to plan for the future, to talk about expanding the herd and perhaps even building a new house, one that didn't hold the ghosts of her troubled past. When the year was up, Mr. Henderson returned with the amended will. He looked from Elena to Lucas, an amused expression on his face. "Well, I dare say this arrangement worked out better than either of you planned." Elena smiled, a genuine radiant smile that transformed her face. She took Lucas's hand, her fingers lacing with his. "It did," she said. "We're very happy, Mr. Henderson." The lawyer tipped his hat and left them to their lives. They built their house, a sturdy, practical home that faced the rising sun, and every morning, Lucas would bring her a cup of coffee and kiss her forehead. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "Everyone said I was too much for any man," she said, a wistful smile on her lips. Lucas wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "They were right," he said, his voice a warm rumble. "You are too much for any man. You were made for a mountain, and you found yours." He kissed her temple, his love a steady, unwavering presence. She was Elena McCall now, the wife of a cowboy and the owner of the Double V Ranch. But most importantly, she was a woman who had finally been seen, accepted, and loved. She was a woman who had learned that being too much was not a curse, it was a gift. The gift of finding a man who was strong enough, stubborn enough, and brave enough to hold on to her and never let go. The wind still howled across the Wyoming prairie, but inside the house on the Double V there was only warmth, peace, and the quiet symphony of a love that had been worth fighting for. A love that had proven that sometimes, when the world tells you that you are too much,